welcome back to my Illustrated Alphabet Art Journal. Today we are looking at D for Distress. Now I started off with a black gessoed page and I wanted to have the black as a border or a frame, so I've used the Donna Downey Signature Stencil paint swatch, and instead of doing sort of the painting the frame as you would normally kind of do, I've actually painted the inside to give that framed look. I am using some printed deli wrap that I very gratefully and graciously received from my good friend Aaron at Imperfect Impulses. He gave me a couple of sheets of this when I met him over in Las Vegas. So I've finally got to use it, so here it is. There's one particular part on the page that I wanted to use. It was an advert for a financial controller or accounting position, and as that's my day job, I had to make sure that I had that put prominently on the page. Just tore the deli wrap up, randomly stuck it down. Some of it's overlapping, some of it's not. Put it down with Liquitex matte gel. When it was dry, just tore the edges again, but more distressing, another technique there. And just all sort of layering on the different stages using a whole lot of different distress techniques to give that look. So the next thing you've just seen me do is I've just done a very light coat of fluid acrylic. Let that dry partially. It was still a little bit wet, and then using a wet wipe I'm sort of rubbing off some of the excess paint. Did it quite patchy because I want it to have that distressed sort of peeled paint kind of a look. Focused on removing it mainly around the edge, but also some patches in the middle, and then to rough it up even more around the edges, I've actually used my Tim Holtz scratching tool, particularly just around the edges of the page where that black is, just so that can shine through a little bit more, and so that the next layers can interact with that as well. Now using a little bit of orange to give another layer of paint, but this time instead of using it straight, I've actually mixed in some golden fluid acrylic, or glazing fluid rather. That's just to give it a bit more play time, thin it out, turn it into a glaze rather than just the paint. Let it dry again, and rubbed off some more of that paint, and now I'm doing a third layer exactly the same as the orange, and I'm going to do the same thing here, so that eventually, or once it's all dry, I should have little wee patches of the red showing through, as well as some of the orange and then some of the yellow, and a combination of the three of them. Just again adding those layers of paint, because most things are painted over the top of each other, whether it's your fence or your wall, and so you sometimes do get those showing through as the wood or the material ages. Now adding some Daler Rowney FW Pearlescent liquid acrylic, and this was in the Mizuma Gold. Just wanting to let little wee drips come down. When that was dry, or just maybe in little wee patches that were still a wee bit damp, I then dropped some of the black on top, and just using a straw, I've blown that around because I really like the effect that gives, particularly in these liquid inks. Then for each of my letters in the word distress, I've given them a different technique. So for the D, we started off, and this one is actually using Distress Crackle paint. So I painted a red acrylic underneath, now gone over the top with the black Distress acrylic, and just sort of put that aside so that it can dry naturally, and then moved on to the next letter. And this one here I'm actually just kind of denting or creasing with my ruler, Tim Holtz ruler. Probably not the best way to use it, but never mind. It gave me the look that I wanted, so that I could have like creases where this brown paint would stay in there and sort of add interest into those creases in effect, to show like a worn look of the letter, and then just going over it with a lighter yellowy, I think it was like a mix of yellow and almost like a mustardy colour. And then I've added some Viva gold on top of that, Viva Inca gold, just to rub it down, and also some gold gelato. Again, just to give that depth of colour, adding different layers into it, and then buffing it off to show the age. And I think I did add a little bit of brown, or sorry, chocolate gelato around the edges as well. From the next letter, the S, I wanted to add some real texture, so using some texture paste there. And once that's dry, I'm then going to come back and paint it. Now, I'm using a whole lot of chipboard letters that I've had for goodness knows how long, from different sets. There might be leftovers or ones that I just didn't want to use, and I found a lot of them have actually got almost like a plastic coating on them, so to give them so that a lot of the techniques and the products would actually work into the chipboard. I've actually had to sort of like scrape that plastic coating off, but then the product has been able to soak in, and because that again adds to that distressed look. This time just using straight scratching tool on the T, so that again some of the colours and the acrylic paint soaks right into the actual chipboard material. With the R, just using sanding techniques and sanding it at different layers. So sanded it before I added the red acrylic. Once that's dry, I'll then sand it some more, so that when I put the second layer of paint in, some of it is going to soak through the red in effect, and some of it's going to be sitting on top. And then again sand it a third time, and leave some of that, in effect, the raw chipboard showing through. With the E, I wanted to show sort of what happens when you water distress something. And with this raw chipboard, it was really cool because I was able to almost separate the layers of the chipboard and really show that distress type look, because a lot of the time when that does dry, the water dries, it actually goes and it holds its shape a lot firmer than if you try and curl the edges when it's dry. To really emphasize that curled up edge type look, I've actually gone and painted all the edges here, and getting the colour into like the individual layers of the chipboard, because it's made up of multiple layers there. You can probably see it a little bit better in the stills at the end of it, where you can see the different layers and how that brown has really gone into it. Simple paint on the top, paint, and then a bit of gelatos on top, just to again sort of mix it up, make sure that the colour isn't plain, adding dimension through putting on colour, then removing some of it, and then layering on some extra colour as well, all to give that distressed look where it's not perfect. The paint job does look beaten and aged and tortured, so to speak. With this S, I actually, again, it had that like plastic coating on the top, and as well as removing that, I've also removed some of the first layer of that, it's almost like a shiny coating that it had, and what that did was it really created the raw look, whereas where I hadn't removed it, some of the paint would like sit on the top, maybe just tinted a little bit, as you could see there. But where I had been able to rip that paper off, the paint really did soak right into the chipboard itself. And it just adds that distinction between the texture as well as the different colours, to give you, again, an aged look, and just sort of making something that is new look old, and that's what we're trying to achieve here. With this S, I wanted to do a repeat of like the paint blob that or the ink blob rather, that I'd put on. So I just painted this purely one colour, left it like that, and didn't actually do the blob until I'd adhered it down. Now we're coming back to the distressed paint D, and the colours hadn't really, or the paint hadn't really cracked as much as I would have liked. So I actually got started off with a scratching tool, but then went to like my piercer and sort of scratched off and chipped off the paint, and I really love the effect of that. With the S, once that moulding paste had dried, went in with a brown like dark burnt sienna paint, got it and painted right into the creases of that with the paintbrush, using a baby wipe, pulled some of it off, and then went through with an orange colour to just hit the tops of those peaks so that you could see the variation in the colours that was used. Once I was happy with that, then adhered all the different letters onto the page, and just using some Aleene's Turbo Tacky Glue that I actually did pick up in the States while I was over there, putting them in place. You see I do tend to use whatever is handy for holding things down, particularly where there is a little bit extra texture and you need an extra weight. Don't be afraid to put something on top to make sure it sticks, because you don't want things coming off the page once you're into it. So all the letters done, all adhered in place, just rubbing that out, rubbing the adhesive around, and here I am just dropping some extra of the ink on there, pushed it around a bit, but then went back to the old straw technique to just push the ink around, and it to look as if you'd drop something on it. Now I decided to experiment here a little bit, and I thought, well, let's try and see what happens if we put white pencil around the edges, and will that sort of emphasize the letters, given that it is in places quite a dark page. And when I'd finished it, to be honest, I thought it looked really yuck and hideous, and I wished I hadn't done it. But hey, you find out by experimenting. So what I did was actually went around just purely over the top using my Stabilo All pencil, and then with my water brush sort of turn that permanent from just a pencil line into the Indian ink line around the edges of it, just building up sort of the borders of the letters, emphasizing those. There was still a little bit of the white showing, and that looked a bit better with the black over the top rather than just purely the white, which just really didn't work for me. Finish it off, just a little bit of the Inca Gold again, just on catching the highlights on top of the S, a little bit on some of the other letters like the E, but really just tying everything all in together. So here's some close-up pictures of the finished page, and then each of the letters showing sort of the finished technique for the different styles. I'm really pleased with the way this turned out. I wanted to showcase a whole range of different products and different techniques, using products that may not normally be associated with distress techniques. I have to admit, I did not use a single actual Tim Holtz distress product, be it inks or paints, because I love them, but I wanted to show that if you didn't have those, there are still other products that you could use to achieve the same look. So I hope you enjoyed. Be sure to follow me on here, and for more detail on the products that I use, check out my blog.